My name is Lena Kassam, and if you'd asked me 3 years ago who I was, I would have said with certainty, a faithful woman of God, a proud mother, and a respected member of my Muslim community in Vancouver, British Columbia. I owned a cozy little Turkish cafe called Sultan's Corner, a popular spot nestled between downtown towers and art galleries, where the smell of cardamom and cinnamon danced through the air and mingled with the chatter of students, professors, and tourists. I was 42, married, devoted. My hijab was never a burden, it was my badge of honor. 5 times a day, I turned to Mecca and offered prayers with every ounce of sincerity I could muster. My husband Amir was the mosque's assistant imam, and we'd raised 3 beautiful children, Rami, Safa, and Zain. Life, as far as I knew it, was good, simple, righteous. But I had another passion, a secret one not many women in my circle understood. I loved to ice climb. It started as a fluke. A guest at the cafe had left behind a pamphlet advertising a beginner's course. Something about the icy peaks, the raw defiance of gravity, called to me. I kept the flyer hidden in the back of my prayer journal for 6 months before I signed up. Over time, it became my escape. On weekends, I'd take my gear and head out to Whistler or Banff, scaling frozen waterfalls and feeling the pulse of God in the wind and snow. I told myself it was worship communion with the Creator through the breathtaking heights of His creation. What I didn't know then was that one climb would change everything. It was late February, bitter cold, but clear. My climb that day was solo, against my instructor's warnings. I was confident. Too confident. I'd climbed empty Hecate's Tears, a jagged frozen face on the edge of Banff National Park, twice before. But something felt off that morning. Maybe it was the eerie silence, the way the sun didn't quite touch the slope the way it usually did. Maybe it was the dream I'd had the night before, falling endlessly through a tunnel of glass, unable to scream. Still I climbed. 3 hours in, I hit a stretch of unstable ice. I should have known better. I paused, tapped my axe, tested the surface. It held for a second. Then the world cracked open beneath me. The fall was terrifying. Then peaceful. Then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was floating. Not above the mountain but above my body. Blood pooled in the snow, steam rising from my wounds. I watched the rescue team scrambling down the icy slope like ants in slow motion. One of them checked my pulse and shook his head. I wanted to scream, to tell them I was still here. But I couldn't. My voice didn't exist anymore. Then came the tearing sound. A silver cord like a thread of light snapped. And I was pulled into the dark. There was no wind where I went next. Only darkness. Thick, living darkness. It wasn't just the absence of light, it was presence. A force that pressed in on me like water crushing a diver too deep in the ocean. It had texture, taste, soundless whispers that crawled across my mind. Then came the voices. Not angry or malicious. Weeping. Thousands, maybe millions, crying out in pain, confusion, disbelief. I couldn't see them, but I could feel them. Souls. Lost. Wandering. Trapped. Suddenly, I was standing, if you could call it that, on a vast plain of cracked, glowing stone. Beneath it flowed rivers of molten light that hissed and screamed when they bubbled up. I wasn't alone. A figure approached from the horizon. His shape shimmered as he walked, first a robed man with a long beard and proud stance. I recognized him instantly. Or I thought I did. The Prophet. Every picture I'd ever imagined, every bedtime story from Madrasa flashed through my mind. I fell to my knees. "Peace be upon you," I whispered instinctively. He smiled. But the smile chilled my bones. "Peace," he said, his voice like broken glass. "There is no peace here, Lena. Only the fruit of your faith." I stared at him. "But you're the messenger of Allah." "I was the messenger of many things," he said, his face beginning to shift. Truth was not always one of them. And then, with horrifying clarity, I understood. The man before me was not who I thought he was. His skin cracked. His eyes turned black. His robes burned away, revealing a creature made of fire and lies, an ancient thing, older than Islam, older than time. I never was what I claimed to be, it hissed. I screamed. The ground split open beneath me, and I fell again. I don't know how long I fell. Time didn't work there. Seconds and centuries collapsed into each other like paper dolls. I landed on another plane, hotter, narrower, suffocating. Figures surrounded me, men and women in traditional Islamic clothing, some familiar, others not. Their faces were twisted in sorrow and rage. They reached out to me, screaming in Arabic. "You taught us this. You told us this was the path." I recognized their voices, old friends from the mosque, a Quran teacher I had once idolized, even distant relatives. They clawed at the air around me, begging for release, cursing their fate. In the center of them all stood the same being who'd posed as the prophet. His eyes burned now. His mouth dripped with shadow. "You see, Lena," he whispered, "when the lie is beautiful enough, even the devout follow it willingly." Then, everything stopped. The air changed. Coolness. Light. A warmth that didn't burn but healed. And a voice. Not loud. Not demanding. But true. "Enough." The creature shrieked and vanished like smoke sucked into a vacuum. The heat receded. The screams faded. And then he came. A man stepped forward, clothed in light. Not dazzling. Not blinding. Just real. Every atom of my being recognized him. Not the Isa of my Islamic theology, but Jesus Christ, the Son of God. Not a prophet. Not a messenger. God himself. I dropped to my knees, sobbing. "I didn't know," I whispered. "I didn't know." "But now you do," he said, kneeling beside me. "And you must choose." Suddenly we were somewhere else. A throne room made of light and sound, infinite in scope. Millions of beings surrounded us, angels beyond description. Some had 6 wings, some burned like suns. All of them sang, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty." I stood before a massive book, glowing with divine energy. The Book of Life. Its pages flipped on their own, revealing my life. Every prayer I'd said. Every time I'd taught children at the mosque. Every time I'd insisted Islam was the final truth. All done in sincerity. All wrong. Then came the visions. Moments I dismissed a Christian's kind word. A Bible I once found on a park bench and refused to open. A dream I'd had years ago of a man in white calling my name, but I'd written it off as the whisperings of Shaitan. Each moment of mercy ignored. Each invitation rejected. And then, I saw my children. Romy. Safa. Zayn. If I stayed silent, if I didn't return, they would walk the same road I did. And I knew where that road led. Jesus turned to me. "You can remain here, safe, forever in my presence. Or you can return and tell them. But it will cost you everything." And still I hesitated. "I'm afraid," I whispered. "You're not alone," he said. The sensation of returning to my body was like being shoved back into a box too small, too stiff, too loud. Pain was everywhere. Bones shattered. Lungs struggling. Machines beeped like angry birds around me. My throat burned. Tubes. Bandages. Cold sheets. But none of it compared to the ache in my soul. Because I had seen the truth. And I had to tell the world. The first voice I heard was Amir's. My husband. He sat beside my hospital bed, murmuring prayers from the Quran under his breath. His prayer beads clacked softly between his fingers. To him, I was a miracle. To me, He was a ticking clock. How long until I told him everything? How long until he walked away? In those early days, I stayed quiet. I pretended the trauma had left me groggy, confused. But I wasn't confused, I was calculating, planning, watching. My family filled the hospital room with well-wishes and mashallas. My daughter Safa brought me a prayer mat and read aloud from the Quran. The local imam visited, telling me Allah must have great purpose for my survival. He was right. Just not the way he thought. But I couldn't speak yet. Not until I was strong enough to withstand the storm. It started with a nurse. Her name was Rachel. She was young, freckled, quiet. But her kindness wasn't just clinical, it was soulful. One evening, when the room was empty, she leaned in and whispered, "You've seen something, haven't you?" My eyes welled. I nodded. She reached into her pocket and placed a small wooden cross in my hand. "You're not alone," she said and slipped away. I held that cross like it was oxygen. That night, I had dreams again, visions. But not of hell this time. I saw Amir pacing in a dark room, clutching his prayer beads. I saw Safa crying, her hands trembling as she held her daughter. I saw my youngest son, Zain, staring at a computer screen, typing "How do Christians pray?" into the search bar. I woke with urgency clawing at my chest. They needed to know. But I had to begin with someone who was already halfway there. Romy. Romy was my eldest. 22. Always curious. Always asking hard questions at the dinner table, questions Amir and I often dismissed as testing from Shaitan. He came alone to the hospital one afternoon, bringing Turkish tea and his quiet gaze. "I don't know what happened, Mama," he said, "but you're different." I took a deep breath, pain shooting through my ribs. "Yes," I whispered. "I died." He nodded. Waited. "I met him," I said, tears spilling. "Jesus." He blinked. Looked at me as if he wasn't sure if he heard right. "ISA?" he asked. "No," I said. "Jesus. Not a prophet. Not a messenger. God." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity. "I knew it," he said finally. "I knew something was off. Nothing made sense in Islam. But I didn't have the courage." I reached for his hand. "You do now." Coming home was surreal. Everything looked the same. The framed Arabic calligraphy, the neat rows of prayer mats, the Quran resting on its velvet stand. But I saw it all now as chains. The moment of truth came on a Friday. Amir and I sat in the living room, the TV on low. Our children had gone out. "I need to tell you what happened," I said. He smiled gently. "The Imam said you had a vision from Allah." "No," I said. "It wasn't from Allah. It was from Jesus Christ." The silence that followed could have cracked the world in half. He laughed at first. Nervous. Then angry. "You've been deceived," he spat. "This is Shaitan testing you in your weakness." "I saw the truth," I said firmly. "I saw hell. I saw him. And I saw the lies we believed." He stood, trembling, fury flashing in his eyes. "Not in this house. Not around our children. You have become a kafir." And just like that, I was no longer his wife. Word spread fast. Our mosque community turned cold overnight. My cafe, once the heartbeat of our neighborhood, was vandalized. Traitor was scrawled in red spray paint across the front window. Employees quit. Friends ghosted me. Extended family stopped calling. My daughter Safa came once, holding her infant girl. "Don't do this, Mama," she pleaded. "You're going to break us." "I'd rather break this house," I said, "than let you all walk into the fire I saw." She left in tears. That night, the cafe was set on fire. They never found out who did it. I stood across the street and watched the flames rise, the building collapsing into itself like a dying star. I wasn't afraid, because I had already seen worse. After the fire, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment above an old antique bookstore. The walls smelled like cedar and ink. The silence was heavy but not lonely, because I had found a new family. It started with a message. A young woman, Samira, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, DM'd me late one night. I heard what happened. I don't know if I believe it, but I can't stop thinking about it. Can we talk? We met at a diner outside the city, both of us in hoodies, watching the door nervously. She had questions. I had answers. And for the first time, I shared everything from the moment the ice broke beneath me to the moment Jesus touched my soul. She wept. So did I. That conversation lit the first spark. Soon, there were others. We called it the Ember Room. Every Thursday night, a small group gathered in my living room. Former Muslims, skeptics, agnostics, even some Christians who had once been afraid to share their faith with their Muslim neighbors. We lit candles, read the Bible, prayed with open hands instead of prescribed words. Some wore hijabs. Some still prayed 5 times a day out of habit. But slowly, their questions turned into belief. Their fear turned into courage. Romy brought in 2 of his university friends. Samira invited her cousin. Then Rachel, the nurse who first gave me the cross, started showing up too, guiding us through scripture with grace and wisdom. The Ember Room became a fire. 6 months after the fire, I received a letter. No name. No return address. Inside was a photo of my daughter, Safa, with her little girl. On the back, she had written, "I had a dream." He was standing in white. He called me by name. "I'm scared. But I believe you now." I held the photo to my chest and sobbed. 2 weeks later, Zayn texted me. "Mom, I read the book of John. We need to talk." Little by little, the walls fell. Not all at once. Not without pain. But the seed had been planted and it was growing. Even Amir, once furious and unreachable, started leaving voicemails. "I don't understand what you saw, but I can't stop thinking about it." He hasn't converted. Yet. It's been 2 years since I died. 2 years since I saw the flames and the light. Today I stand on the same mountain where I fell. Not to tempt fate, but to honor the place where he found me. I brought a stone with me. On it, I painted a simple message. I was dead, but now I live. LK. I placed it at the base of the cliff. Not a shrine. A marker. A reminder that even in the coldest, darkest places, the God who created the stars still speaks. The Ember Room is now a global network. We've launched an online community for former Muslims wrestling with questions. We do anonymous Zoom meetings, send Bibles in secret, help new believers escape violent situations, and offer comfort to the scared and confused. We've seen dozens come to faith. Hundreds more are circling the truth, desperate for it but terrified of the cost. And still, we press on. Because every soul is worth it. Because every whisper of truth can become a roar. Because every time someone asks, "Why did you leave Islam?" I get to answer. Because I died, and Jesus brought me back.